So welcome everyone to our first Friday event for October of 2023. I'm very, very pleased to be able to welcome Reed Morrison. Reed Morrison is formerly of the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, which in itself is a very exciting thing to be able to say. I've spoken with a little about his background, but we agreed that he would weave those tales into his presentation today. So without any further ado, I'm going to allow Reed to take the stage. Reed?
Great. Thank you, John. This is very exciting for me. But let me start out by doing some verification. I know every time you're probably all very familiar with going on a website on your phone or something like that, and there's a verification. You put in a code, you do something. So here's my verification. I want to make sure I'm at the right AAA, and I'll tell you why. A few years ago, a friend of mine who was at my house, whose name happened to be Leonard Cohen. It wasn't the Leonard Cohen, but Leonard Cohen backed his car down a long driveway, hit a wall, and had a flat tire. And he sat there at the end of the driveway. I noticed it later on. I went down. I said, "Len, everything okay?" He said, "Fine." I called AAA. And an hour later, I looked out, and he was still there. So I went down to the end of the driveway, and I said, "Well, look, give me your card, and I'll call them. Maybe it'll make a difference somehow." So he gave me his card, and the card said AARP. So I'm mentioning that because if you're in car trouble and you need emergency assistance, do not call AARP. They're very, very slow to respond. He may as well call the American Anthropological Association. So anyway, I'm glad to be at this AAA for lots of reasons. I've been a Jungian depth psychotherapist in private practice for many, many years, and also a psychedelic researcher and facilitator-guide at the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. I'm going to put a slide down. This is the part of Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, where the center is located. This is not the main hospital center. Johns Hopkins is a huge monster. It's the largest private employer in Baltimore. One of the reasons why I like this picture is that all the way on the left is a sort of a long building that you might see. And when I was in high school, everybody had to have a community project. So my project was working at that building. It wasn't Hopkins then. It was Baltimore City Hospital. And it housed terminal cancer patients. So my job that I was given was circulating all the floors with a cart of cigarettes. And I handed out cigarettes to coughing, gagging cancer patients. This was in the mid-60s. And that was still the time when the tobacco companies were making these claims that it's all healthy. So that was my first introduction to this campus. And I'm glad that I'm able to move to a different building. As a psychotherapist, I know that I'm thinking my kids always said to me, "That's the easiest job in the world." And I would say to them, "What do you mean it's the easiest job in the world?" They said, "All you do is you take the last word that a person says to you and you turn it into a question. So if somebody says, 'My mother,' you just say, 'Your mother.'" And I had a hard time arguing with them. That they did make it sound very easy. And as it turned out, two of my children are psychotherapists. But my real confession is that I'm an anthropologist wannabe. I was really drawn to anthropology as a freshman undergraduate. And maybe it was a call to the mystery. I don't know. But I went into my freshman class, the Anthropology 101, and this professor came out, and he was dressed all in khakis and boots. He was dressed like Raiders of the Lost Ark way before Spielberg. And he was very impressive. And he stood in front of the class, and I thought, this is great. This is where I want to be. This is anthropology. As it turned out, he only accepted questions from the women in the class, he gave all the women A's, and all the men, if we worked really, really hard, we could eke out a C. So that was sort of the end of my anthropology career, for better or for worse. Um, so fate really intervened at that point, and I went to the psychology department. And depth psychology, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and Jungian psychology in particular, was not really welcomed or recognized at this school, in this psychology department. It was a rat lab, behaviorism. And so I said, "Where's Jung? Where's Freud? Where are these guys?" And somebody said, an upperclassman said, "Right through there." And he was pointed to the men's room, the restroom. So I went in, and above the urinals there were pictures of Jung and Freud. So that was sort of strike two in that, in my quest for a career, or at least for a major. But through this was the late '60s, and through psychedelics and beginning to study Jung. One day, it must have been after or during a psychedelic session, I don't know. I was walking down a corridor in a hallway in a faculty building, and I saw a big sign, a poster that said "Go to India." So in that state of mind I was in, I turned into the next door next to the poster and said, "Okay, sign me up." So I was signed up to go to India, and I went and spent 5 months in India. And what I really learned there, and I took the '60s very seriously, so I was very involved in activism and drug use and psychedelics, blah blah blah. But when I got in India, people said, "Did you meet a guru?" I said, "I saw a few of them." But what I really learned there and experienced was self-confrontation. That I was forced by the environment and by the people to wake up and see that I was this middle-class hippie, touristing around, and here were all these people who were just really struggling to survive. So after India, I came back and really decided that I wanted to pursue psychology seriously, and that I wanted to go to graduate school. But where to go to graduate school? At those times, the humanistic psychology was the thing, but there weren't many places to go. And then I heard about this school called Humanistic Psychology Institute. It was in San Francisco and New York. So at that time, after India, I was living in a commune in Baltimore. And it was a commune that was not a drugs and rock and roll commune. It was activists, people starting. My future wife lived there. She started the Waldorf School in Baltimore. I started a drug treatment program that was based on the premise that drug addicts were seeking transcendence, and that became later my graduate project. So I decided to go to interview with this Humanistic Psychology Institute. And I found that I was supposed to meet this guy for an interview named Stanley Krippner, who was in Maimonides Dream Laboratory in Brooklyn. And I understand from John that Stan may be on this Zoom today, which would be very exciting for me and scary for me. He was a wonderful mentor and committee chair, but boy, was he tough on editing and criticism. And I thank him for that. And it was through Stan that a lot of my career really blossomed. So anyway, I was going to go meet this famous man. He had a few books out at that point, but there I was on a commune, and I thought, well, I better get trade in my sandals and get a pair of nice shoes and a shirt and pants. So I did all that. Took the train up to Brooklyn. I went to Maimonides Hospital and the Dream Laboratory, and sat in a chair waiting anxiously for this famous guy, this Stanley Krippner, to come in. And he finally came in, and he and I were wearing the same shirts and the same shoes. So we looked at each other, and we thought, "Oh my God!" And I think at that point in my memory now, which is probably not completely accurate, he looked at me, I looked at him, and he said, "Well, you're in." So I was accepted that day into graduate school. And what Stanley did, for many things he did for me, but he introduced me to the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. And that was at Spring Grove Hospital in Catonsville, Maryland, and was attached to the University of Maryland School of Medicine. And that's where the early LSD studies were taking place. So that's where Groff was. When Groff left, I'm trying to think. My memory is so terrible. Anyway, so that's where I met all the. Oh boy. Okay. If somebody can go into my mind and tell me what I'm thinking, I'd appreciate that. Maybe a shaman is here who can do that. Probably Stanley could. But I met all those people, and they became my faculty. Many of them, and later on, after I finished my private practice, I felt finished. I was sort of groping as what to do. You know, who am I? What purpose do I have? I went to a lecture with a young working group and ran into Roland Griffiths, who was head of the CPCR, Center for Psychedelics and Consciousness Research at Hopkins, and Bill Richards. I knew Bill from many years ago at the research center. So he invited me to come into Hopkins as a facilitator guide for the studies. So that's Bill on the right. Mary Casamano was my co-guide, and she's the one who really taught me everything that I knew and know about being a psychedelic guide. So I was very fortunate to be able to work with these two people. Not long after that, I was walking in downtown Baltimore and crossing a street with this woman who I lived with at the commune, who later became my wife. And she said, the person you really need to be working with on a daily basis or for graduate school as a mentor is this guy, Norman Bradford. And Norman Bradford at that time was the only Jungian in Baltimore. And she said, but unfortunately, he's away. She knew him well. She said, he's away for a year with R.D. Laing in London. And it's a shame that you can't meet him now. So we're crossing a street, stepped up on the curb, and physically ran into Norman Bradford. He came back. He'd come back the night before, and we all laughed, and he became my mentor and a supervisor. So that's the way things seem to go. And I think things seem to go this way in terms of psychedelics and some of the gifts that people get from this work. The psychedelic experience is this connection to and this trust of the psyche, or trust of the soul. So the nexus really for me of depth psychology, anthropology, really lies in the common ground. Oh, before I even go into this, let me just say, Stanley, if you're listening, thank you for everything. I owe you so much. So anyway, the nexus really for me lies in the common ground is this evolutionary history of the psyche, of the mind and behavior, the evolving psyche and the evolving emergence of consciousness. So with depth psychology, the psyche evolves like any other organ of the body. The human psyche includes impressions of its evolutionary past, and Jung called this repository the collective unconscious, and he called identifiable patterns of collective archetypes. The Jungian luminary James Hillman, who many of you may have known and know his work, always said that the function of the psyche is to imagine. That the psyche imagines, that's what it does. The production of the psyche is evident in the phenomenal world of subjective experience. And the subjective phenomenal world underlies the objective world. And Jung proposed that this consciousness that we have or that we partake in reflects a dynamic homeostasis between conscious and unconscious states. And where there's imbalance between the two, that's where psychopathology can come in. And then the psyche then tries to rebalance and to heal. Depth psychologists always ask him or herself when faced with a participant or a client, what does the psyche want? What is this problem trying to introduce what kind of healing, what kind of completion, what kind of individuation. We'll talk about that later. So psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy seeks to open up that liminal space for healing, to create a temenos, a sacred healing environment. It invites the ancient, natural healing capacities of the psyche within a modern psychotherapeutic framework, and invites the natural healing capacities of the evolving psyche in a context that includes science of the objective world and spiritual of the psyche. Let's see where I am here. I always make too many notes, so I'm going to be looking down. One of the best examples of a lecture, and I always try to hope that I would follow it and never have. When I was in the faculty at University of Maryland Psychiatry Department, and John Weir Perry came to lecture. He was the Jungian analyst who was in San Francisco, and I know Stanley knew him, and many of you probably did. And he came out. It was the whole amphitheater auditorium was packed. He came out with his cowboy boots and Western tie, and I don't know if he had a cowboy hat, but in my memory he did. And he stood on the edge of the stage and just shrugged and said, "I left my notes on the plane." And so he just pulled up a chair and talked to us. So I hope to do as much of that as I can, but I will fall back on some notes. So at Hopkins and at many of the university-based studies, they follow really the pattern of the phases of initiation, of ritual initiation. I don't know what you're seeing. If you can see, if you can see the screen, because I can only see part of it because I'm seeing your faces. Maybe somebody could unmute and let me know what you're seeing, please. John, yeah.
Yeah, we can see your screen. You're doing fine.
Okay, all right, good. So a lot of this came to depth psychology through Jung, who met Eliade in 1950, I think, at the Eranos conferences, which was sort of a salon, multidisciplinary salon of all the great thinkers of the time. And he introduced Jung to this process, the ritual process, which played significantly into his own experiences with the Red Book that we'll talk about in a little while. So that the first part, and these things that you know well, and let me, I'm going to see if I can do something here. Okay, so separation and preparation, and separation in terms of the studies of the psychedelic studies. A volunteer applies to come to a university medical center, so there's a degree of separation there to undergo unique experience. That's part of an experimental drug investigation. Now, there's a long process. Each of the studies, and the studies often end up with about 60 participants. And sometimes that's pared down and ends up to about 40. But often, maybe it's not unusual for 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people to apply. And the only way to apply is on the website. So when people always ask me, can you get me into the study? I said, no, you have to go to the website. You have to go through all kinds of interviewing, psychological assessments, physical exams. And if you make it through all that, then you're ready for this phase of called preparation, where we had two guides, often a male and a female, who would work on establishing a relationship of trust with this person. That we really were taking on this role of like sort of Dante's Virgil, that we're going to accompany these people in a non-directive way. We make sure that the guardrails are there, that it's safe, and we want to know as much about this person as we can. Usually, a 6 to 9 hours of meeting of preparation, and the week leading up to what we call dosing day, when the psychedelic plant medicine is taken. So on dosing day, we meet the volunteer. I don't know if you can see all this. Maybe we can go back to this is a room where a lot of it took place. We have 4 of these rooms. We had 4 of them. and they need to build some more. I think they are. But it's really a very comfortable place. The building itself is sort of awful. It's sort of a lot of the rooms are windowless. It's sort of a stark, uh, hospitalish place. But this room is beautiful, and you can see all the artifacts. And the idea is to create a sacred environment. In fact, when the psilocybin is given, when the capsule comes in, it's put into a chalice. They have a chalice that was used in Aztec ceremonies, and there's moments of silence. There's the person then is covered in a blanket if they want to. Their eye shades to direct attention inward. Their headphones where music is played that can be conducive to the experience, that follows the arc of the ritual, of the initiation process. And we're also, during this process, taking vitals. The person will have a blood pressure cuff, would be measuring heart rate, oxygen, and that's measured at first every 2 hours and then every half hour after that. The process takes 7 hours, where we stay in the room with the person for 7 hours. Let me go back where we were. So the volunteers encouraged to trust the process, engage, and go through whatever comes up, and to rely on the guides for support. It's really Rogerian, non-directive, client-centered support. Although the participant can ask, and we say, well, if you want us to hold your hand, we'll do that. If you want us to touch your shoulder, but we're very careful to do really what the person wants. The experiences themselves are, some of them are just very light. Some of them are very challenging. And when I think about some of the legalization that's going on around the country, specifically in Oregon, where, and many of you may be listening from Oregon, I don't know, but I'm a little bit concerned with the qualifications of a high school diploma or a GED and an 8-week course, because sometimes in these sessions, people will scream, they'll say, make it stop, they will jump up, they'll want to get out. We always have somebody, there's always a psychiatrist or a physician on the floor who has rescue meds. There's a defibrillator. We've never had to use any of it that I knew of, but it's there. So this is a process that's wonderful, that can create tremendous transformative changes, and it's very powerful. It needs to be respected. During the after dosing day, after it's over, the person is, we make sure somebody is there to take the person home or back to the hotel. We've briefed that person and met with him or her also, and we encourage them to get a good night's sleep if they can, but also to write their experiences, write about them before you go to bed, and bring them in the next morning, where the integration process begins. So integration is often, and these are drug studies. These are sort of FDA approved drug studies, and so this is not healing necessarily, although much healing takes place. And I'll get to this in a little while. This is sort of the strengths and weaknesses of this approach. Is that the strengths is that people get access to this incredible plant medicine. The downside is that it's what this is about mostly is data collection. Data collection in the interest of hopefully helping to drive these medicines towards FDA approval, legalization, rescheduling from Schedule 1. So integration, it again takes usually 6 to 9 hours, and in my view, it's a very short amount of time. And it's usually over the next 2 or 3 weeks. It's a conversation with the participant and guides that's supposed to help the individual make sense and use of the psychedelic ordeal that they've gone through. We try not to make interpretations or give psychotherapeutic directives. We want to assist and support. There's a follow-up. Usually, each study has a different endpoint. There's an endpoint follow-up, and often 3 months after that, and sometimes 12 months after. But it's not a meeting. It's usually an intern contacting the person, finding out, and asking them to go verbally through an assessment, through a questionnaire. Let's see what I missed. So let me read a report. This is somebody who I worked with, or I was a guide for. Mary and I were a guide for. Let me go down. What do I have here? Oh, okay. So this is I'm going to read this. This is a man, and this is not the person in this cartoon, obviously. In his, I think, mid-30s, he was in an academic sort of science career. Very intelligent man, but he had problems with intimacy, connecting with people, relationships, keeping relationships going, sharing, caring, empathy. A lot of the things that we'll find out later that Jung also suffered from. So here's his report. I'll read it to you. He said, the drug came on in about 30 to 45 minutes. After taking my dose, I felt a certain calmness or heaviness in my body as we paged through animal portraits. Often when people are waiting for the medication to come on, for the substance to come on, we have lots of books and pictures, and they choose something to look at. This person looked at animal portraits, a big book, like a coffee table book. I recall seeing one photo with tall savanna grasses that became almost impressionistic. So the drug is coming on. The colors and shapes took on a novel subjective impression, as if they were becoming less photorealistic and more like a painting. I experienced just a little bit of nausea, and when I laid down and put the eye shades and headphones on, I began seeing things almost immediately. Animals appeared, guiding me through scenes. What I first thought were rats and mice, in hindsight, I think they were early shrew-like human ancestors. But there were rats and mice and foxes too, each with a new scene to show me. Scenes of loved ones coming into existence and then fractalizing. Scenes of the African savanna thousands or millions of years ago. Scenes of the deep future. I didn't feel like I had control over what I was shown. Some were so intense that I laughed and sobbed. The experience was so expansive, at some points I felt like I couldn't open my eyes wide enough to take in the universe. The universe I was being presented with. I remember saying, and perhaps I vocalized this, what, wow. Some scenes taught me deep, ineffable lessons. Others were very direct and explicit. One said, well, there's last works, there's more than enough time. Shut up and listen. I recall it was perhaps one of the last works of fiction I read, of Mice and Men, where the character Lenny, who had a learning disability, didn't know his own strength and accidentally crushed his pet mouse. I thought of my brother. When it was over and during the last hour or two of the experience, I felt drawn to reach out to loved ones, acquaintances, and other people in my life who have had a lasting impression on me. Tell them how important and meaningful their presence had been. The experience helped me understand somehow that there's more to the universe than what I can see and touch and experience. When I got up, the symptoms I had been reporting seemed to have disappeared. I don't know if it was a sense of awe or just the overwhelming power of the experience, and I don't know how long it will last. I'd like to be able to freeze this feeling into place. The sense of dread, for example, turned into laughter, as in, why are you taking this trivial thing so seriously? I'd like to integrate that feeling into the pieces of my life that I've struggled with. My feelings were all wonder, joy, deep sadness, and sorrow, and back again. My energy levels were moderate. Sometimes I felt like I could tap along with the jazz beat and improvise and make my own rhythm without rules. Whatever beat I tapped out was the correct one. there was a certain confidence in that. At the end of the day, I was pretty wiped out, though. The experience was challenging in the same way one might imagine the most epic movie of all time might be challenging. There was so much joy and happiness, and then it disappeared. Large emotional voices were created in the place of a menagerie of happy plants and animals and friends, all trying to show me things. And death and darkness and an empty universe, and then it was full again. The range of emotions and facial expressions I was able to feel and make, I've never felt before. At some points, I was breathless, and I'll bet I stopped breathing as I was captivated by certain scenes and didn't want to disturb them, or when I didn't want the joy to end. But when it did, I sobbed and sobbed, but realized the beauty in what I was able to see, and then realized that beauty can come back again, and sometimes in the same form, sometimes different. John, I think I'd like to do right now is maybe to unmute people, and we can discuss for a little bit, and then I'll go back in my presentation. Does that sound doable? Hello, John, are you there?
Yeah, I just pushed the wrong mute button.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess the time now would be to just ask if anybody has a particular question.
Yeah.
If you do have a question let me just change my little view here so I can see everybody. If you do have a question, hold up your hand so I can see that you're
right. And John, I'd like to just take a few of them because we have a lot more to cover, but I think this is a good place to pause.
Okay. Anybody out there? Hello? Anybody have a question you'd like to ask? Claire.
I guess I'll ask this. The man's report is exceedingly like a shamanic journey, but did not train him to shamanic journeying. Can you talk about the distinction a moment, please?
Well, I am not an expert on shamanic journeying, so I really can't speak to it. I think what I know about the psychedelic experience is that there's so many parallels and overlaps, so that's all that I can say about it. I think there are people on this call who could probably speak to it quite well.
Claire, would you like to follow up with a comment on that? Because you're one of the people who could probably speak with.
I don't know what to say. I mean, this is a drug-guided journey.
Right.
This is in contrast to a lot of shamanic journeying, which does not include drugs, and yet much the same events occur. And the preparation is, I don't know that it's similar, but it does involve sound and movement and modifying what you can see, that is wearing eye covers, and being in an environment in which sound is constantly present, namely a drum. And well, it could be a rattle or it could be a whistle, it could be other things, but it's going to be one form of sound, not the multiple forms that are used at Johns Hopkins.
Right.
They're just, it seems as if we're getting to a similar place in the experiential world of human beings, the function of the brain, that is supported by a very different approach, and that one can get there without any of this complexity that allows only 60 out of 6,000 to access this world, which has been stolen away from us by Western thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it. It feels that way to me.
Yeah. Well, I hear you, and thank you for that comment. I think that what I'm describing here is sort of a medicalized or a medical influenced is not really shamanic journey. And one of
Yes.
the problems that I had with it is that the context is laboratory, and there isn't a connection. For example, the report of the man the report I read from that man, I have no more contact with it. I don't know what he did with this. I don't know if he went into his community. From what I understand uh, of shamanic rituals and indigenous uh, processes, is that the community is the container for all of this, and this initiation is the beginning of a journey that lasts a lifetime.
Mhm.
So that's the problem. I think it's wonderful that these studies are taking place, and hopefully it can allow more people have access to it in different settings. But the in the university laboratory setting is one that's a little, for my taste, a little too constrained and sort of cut off from the rest of the individual's life and from community life.
It seems very typical of biomedical thinking.
It is. Now,
Reductionistic thinking.
interesting though, this brings together, these studies bring together pretty hardcore scientists. I mean, these neuroscientists that I got to know at Hopkins, and spirituality. So and so bringing those two together, that sort of alchemical mix is very interesting unto itself. So some of the people who I'm thinking of, Roland Griffiths and Bill Richards and Mary, very spiritually oriented people, and also and very accomplished scientists. So that I think that over time that's going to change. That's going to have some. That'll create some change unto itself.
Did they talk about consciousness at all?
Yes, I mean the whole. I mean the title of the center, the name of the center is the Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, and I think in the studies, I mean, these are academic studies, and people are trying to get funding and publications, all the whole mix that you find in any academic setting. At the same time, many of the people are deeply spiritual people and are very oriented to exploring consciousness and expanding it. So it's a great mix. And I was there for 3 years. I'm going to go back to my little presentation if you don't mind. But you really led me into this well, Claire. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, we'll work together again sometime. But I had very rich experiences during my 3 years there. Again, but what really happens, during these sessions? I mean, what really happens during the dosing? What is the human experience? And I'm always reminded of something that James Hillman said, that if you want to really study human behavior, you don't really don't look for randomly controlled trials in a university setting. Don't worry about the statistics. Go to case histories and go to fiction, go to poetry. Find out what the human experience is. So I wrote an article about, God, it's 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, that actually Stanley gave me some good notes on. But my thesis was that this article is that initiation, that ritual initiation, is a autonomous function of the psyche. That whenever we're stuck, whether by encounter trauma or just depression, that the psyche begins this process of separation by way of generating symptoms that sort of separate us from the norm, and then puts us through this ordeal of death and rebirth and return. That's natural. It's a natural inheritance of human beings. So anyway, I'm coming from that place too. That doesn't just take place in a laboratory. This takes place every day in our lives. And the idea is to cooperate with this. As a psychotherapist, I did my best to help people through this process. And instead of, I mean, some people did need medication along the way if they weren't safe, but the idea is not to interfere, to be a companion to the individual, to try to help the person find meaning in it and purpose. Jung had a famous statement that that he said that psychoneurotic disorders was suffering in search of purpose. So when a person realizes that this problem that I'm having may have a purpose, and the purpose may have a healing purpose, or a purpose that makes me more complete in myself, more whole. Jung used the term individuation. When there's purpose, then the individual can go through this initiation, this very natural initiation. Now, as you know, the whole medical side of this, and there are many, there's so much money in this, all kinds of pharmacological companies are sprouting up, IPOs, all that stuff. And there are companies that want to create, for example, a psilocybin substance that gives this transformative experience without the mystical experience. And I know many of us at the Hopkins are very questioned that and thought that the mystical experience, this is what it was about. This meeting of something greater than ourselves, and submitting to it and surrendering to it creates the transformation. But there are going to be pills out there. There will be drugs out there that will claim to, just like, take this pill and call me in the morning kind of thing, and you'll have a transformation. And who knows, maybe that'll happen, or maybe it'll work. I have my doubts. I'd like to go into a little bit of sort of the fiction or the stories, the tales of transformation, and there's some words that we'll talk about, and I think psyche, this dynamic, evolving organ, analogous to other organs of the body. It's always moving and growing, and another catabasis in classical Greek mythology is the journey of renewal to the underworld. You know all about that, and there's some journeys I listed there that you're probably familiar with. Nekia is the night sea journey. I'll talk a little bit about Lang's book in the 10-day journey. Numinosum, this place of the numinous experience, the spiritual transpersonal dimension, from Rudolf Otto, who Jung knew and valued. And meaning was this value, what I just spoke about. When purpose is discovered, meaning of suffering is discovered, and that's a very important element to healing. Individuation is what the psyche does when it's healthy enough. It becomes whole. And I'll talk more about that in particular when we talk about Jung and what he went through. Let's see what I have next. So anyway, the Odyssey is a story that you all know, but it's a story of transformation, of separation and ordeals, death and rebirth and return to Ithaca. So he had a pretty tough journey, just as people often do in these psychedelic studies. The most challenging psychedelic studies sessions are often the most transformative that I've seen in my experience. Jung, the big rock stars of Jung's era, and Jung was mostly active in the early part of the 20th century. Joyce and Picasso were two people who he thought who got all the headlines. They were if there was social media back there, they were the stars. They were the TikTok stars. But Ulysses, the book, goes through a journey unto itself, analogous to Homer's Ulysses Odyssey. And here's a drawing of what Bloom did on that day, that that 24-hour period. And there are no straight lines. This is not a statistical study. It's hard to graph this one. This is the notebook that Joyce used writing. So if you ever find that, and you're working on a manuscript and you're saying, boy, I don't know, I think I might have to cross out a few things, or I'm confused about what I've written, take a look at this. You're in good company. Here's a photo of Nighttown, a depiction of Nighttown where Bloom went through during his descent into death, back to rebirth. And for me, the best myth is the Divine Comedy of Dante. There we have the three parts of initiation. It's right there. And it was a natural process that took place. You're familiar with Dante's midlife crisis, of how he fell in love with a beautiful woman who he could not marry. He did not have any access to. She was marrying somebody else, but it was a case of a profound unrequited love. He was also a politician. He lost his election. I don't know if it was rigged or not, but he was driven out of Florence. And at one point, he in the book, in the beginning of the Inferno, he has a choice of whether to try to go to Beatrice, to try to just go to her and say, look, I'm in love with you. Can't you leave your husband? Or he can descend. He can go into this problem that he had. Very much akin to, I don't know if some of you have children and grandchildren, if you read St. George and the Dragon book, a wonderful children's book by Margaret Hodges. And at one point after St. George, who doesn't know who he is, and he goes through this whole journey of finding his identity, which people do in these initiation rituals, a new identity. He's at the end, after he's killed a dragon, he's rescued the damsel and her parents, the king and queen, and he says, at one point he meets a hermit and says, I just want to go right to the fairy queen. I want to go up to heaven. I'm done. And she says, no, you have to descend. So he descends, and then his new wife, Uno, says, well, we're going to be happily ever after. He said, no, I really have to serve the fairy queen. There's more work to be done. In these studies, in these psychedelic initiation rituals, this is just the beginning. And as I'll talk more about that as we go through. But as you know, here's a depiction of the Inferno, the 9 levels of hell, and there's a shedding process akin to the myth of Inanna and many others. So the psychedelic guide, Virgil, made sure he went through this safely, although this was traumatic to say the least. He went through some scenes that were pretty horrific and difficult, as often we do in life. After surviving hell, after surviving our own hells of the problems that we encounter in our life, then it's time for coming to terms with it the best we can. In purgatory, the 7-level climb, where we confront ourselves. That's where conscience is made. That's where compassion and empathy is created. So it's not enough that we just descend, but we have to meet ourselves. We have to meet the other half of ourselves and come to terms with it in some way. I'm often think about the old book by Robert Bly, The Little Book of the Human Shadow, where he says what we need to do with the shadow, the undeveloped, unknown parts of ourselves, is to eat it. We have to take it in. We have to digest it, metabolize it, in order to go on. So people who go through the psychedelic work, they have a lot of work ahead of them. They go through this. They have this incredible experience, this peak experience of sorts, and they do their best to integrate that, to find meaning in it. But it's just the beginning. there's more descent to go through, and we'll be talking about that a little while when I talk about the Grail legend. And finally, he gets to Paradiso and meets Beatrice again, where he has to learn how to love and learn the value of love and learn the functions of the soul in regards to loving other people and of shedding a narcissistic pattern. Also think about that first experience of, and I always go back to Lang because he was a mentor to my mentor Norm Bradford, and that first experience of the psychedelic experience. I'm thinking about his famous statement that and Lang used psychedelics quite a bit personally and in his psychotherapeutic work, and he wrote, "I have seen the bird of paradise. She has spread her wings, and I shall never be the same." And often people who have that first psychedelic experience, that's their experience. I'm fine. Often people. I worked in a depression study where people claim that my depression's gone. It is gone. You know, I'll throw away my crutches, figuratively, and so they've been to the top of the mountain, and they have this view of life where everything is connected. Everything seems to make sense. They feel waves of pleasure and knowing, and they feel they fit into the universe. But that's not often. That's the beginning. It's a very important beginning. It's that peak experience that we keep with us. That we know it's possible. We know that land is possible. That land at the apex. So it's a very important experience to have. In the back of that book, that famous book, Politics of Experience, he wrote a little piece on one of his, a friend of his who later became a patient, who he encountered when the person was a patient. And the story was called The 10-Day Journey. A friend of his who was a sailor, who had a 10-day psychosis, where he went through this whole process, that was this initiatory process, and returned. Went through the catabasis, the nekia. Also, the excellent book, Confrontation with the Unconscious, Jungian Depth Psychology and Psychedelic Experience. That's on the reading list. And maybe I can find what I wrote. This is, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? We don't know. This is a time for a commercial break. Anyway, he described his LSD experience as being very debilitating, at least initially. He had a bad trip after having several good ones. And it took him years to work through it, to integrate, to find his way through it, to find the purpose in it and the meaning of it. Along the way, he became a Jungian analyst. So it's a book that I really recommend. And if those of you who are not familiar with Jungian psychology, he provides a great introduction through his travails. Okay, well, here's Jung on the left. And I'm including this picture on the right, which is me. And this is a sort of a cautionary photo, that if you don't want your kids or your grandchildren to be Jungians, and maybe you don't give them a pipe when they're 4 years old. So just make a note of that. So maybe I was destined from an early age, or cursed from an early age. I don't know. I'm going to get into Jung and his experience and his psychosis-like experience. And I should be looking at the time. Jung was an artist too. In the early, early part of the early 1900s, he was painting with the post-impressionists in Paris. So he was quite the artist. He went through, had a very traumatic experience on two levels. One, World War I was starting, and he had intimations of this and dreams of blood in the streets. And also he was rejected by Sigmund Freud, his father figure and mentor. So and this culminated in 1913. He started having these experiences. By day, he would work in the hospital with psychotic patients. By night, he would, by a process that we'll talk about a little bit if we have time, active imagination, he went into this liminal area, went into the unconscious, and he journaled and wrote about it in these books he called the Black Books. Black Books became later the Red Book, and the original Red Book was on the left. The one you can buy in stores is on the right. It's not a book you can put into a backpack. It's 10 pounds. It's quite a masterpiece, I think. The lighter weight version is the reader's version, which I encourage you to start with. The reader's edition. And he wrote about it in a journaling way, but also painted it. So this is some of his experiences as he went into this place. And it's important to know that Jung was not in favor of psychedelics. He was very aware of them. And when he wrote about psychedelics, he called them mescaline. He spent some time in the Southwest with the Hopi and Navajo, and he was I can't imagine he would participate in ceremonies without partaking, but his followers say that he never did. He was afraid that psychedelics would introduce patients or participants into areas of the psyche that were just too overwhelming. That he feared that it would kick off psychosis, schizophrenia. Well, here are some of his depictions of what he went through. He wrote it it was written in calligraphy in Latin, so the Red Book has a translation, obviously, but this was a meticulous journaling and a work of art as well as a documentation of a psychological process. He was in his journey. There were monsters about. It's a beautiful book. There were many times in his journey, in his journaling, that he encountered evil. And what he ended up saying was that, in writing, was that evil only has a place when it's paired with good. So if we can, in our consciousness, good and evil, then we can grow. So evil has a role in psychological growth. But he came to that the hard way, through really going through very harrowing experiences. Let me just stay with this for a minute. When he went through this, he stopped, I think in 1932, writing in the transcribing from the Black Books. There were 6 Black Books into the Red Book, and just stopped. And so some of his followers said, "Why did he stop? Why didn't he sort of left us, hanging?" And in my opinion, and it has to be a humble opinion because I'm not the scholar certainly that many are in this area, that integration for him occurred over the rest of his life. And some of the what he ended up writing about and speaking about was that during this process, what he encountered, the most difficult encounters, were encounters with himself, of coming to terms with the fact that he was very cerebral. He was all in his head. He had trouble with intimacy. He had trouble with eroticism, not sexual eroticism. He engaged in that plenty, but the eroticism of of feeling life, of being part of life, of giving, of allowing people to know him, of being relatable and having deep relationships. He couldn't have that early on. And throughout the rest of his life, he was able, I think, it seemed, to integrate that and arrive at that integration, that wholeness, where the two parts of ourselves, or at least two parts, conscious and unconscious, are working together, for that homeostatic process is working. The real, the myth of psychedelic initiation, or any initiation, for me, is portrayed in the Grail legend. Emma Jung was Jung's wife. That was he said, and she said to him, "Don't write anything about the Grail legend. That's mine." He laid off. She wrote most of it, died before she was finished, and Jung's number two, Marie Louise von Franz, completed it. But the Grail legend is the whole story of ritual initiation, of somebody who doesn't know who they are, who hears the call, as maybe Campbell would call it. It is the call to be a hero. Jung was plagued, and he felt that he was captured by the hero archetype, the hero complex, and that it greatly inhibited his psychological growth. So early on, let me think where I am here and see. Early on, Parsifal, the hero of the Grail legend, stumbles upon the Grail castle. He has his first psychedelic experience, so to speak, and the first experience, even people who are in the studies, it's an unconscious initiation. They don't know what they're in for. They come upon this peak experience. Percival came upon the Grail legend. He didn't know the questions to ask. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know how to relate to it. And so it disappeared. He then embarked on the hero's journey until he became a great knight. He won all kinds of battles and was later admitted to the Round Table, to Arthur's Round Table. And just as he was ready to hang his shield on the wall and get his Academy Award or whatever it be, win the prize, the loathly damsel entered the castle. And the loathly damsel was described as an old hag, and this is well before feminism. But she pointed her finger at him and said, and as she did, plants died, dogs, fell over, people got sick. He said, "You've forgotten your mission. You forgot your quest. You forgot why you're in life. You forgot your purpose." He had to crawl out of the castle and find his way again. The loathly damsel picture. And of course, in the shadow, the mirror image is Blanche Fleur, the beautiful damsel who he fell in love with in his journey. So he embarked in all these great battles until he finally had his last battle with the Black Knight. And Parsifal could defeat any knight anywhere, but the Black Knight was something else. The Black Knight was, of course, his shadow, was the other part of himself. And as it turns out, it was his brother. His brother was his father had gone off to the Crusades. His father married a dark woman in Baghdad, had a child, and later Ferefez, the Black Knight, reunited with Parsifal. So they became whole again. They became best friends. They went back to the Grail Castle, and they were able to enter the castle and really see and feel and avail themselves of the Holy Grail. And there they are. And here's the joining, the alchemical wedding of the male and female, of the unconscious and unconscious. One of Jung used gender descriptors in his psychological, in his treatise. That's unfortunate for us today. But here's Eros and Logos, the unconscious and conscious joining together in an image of wholeness. So the journey that these initiations lead us on is a long journey, and we need to have that transformative peak experience to guide us on, to lead us on, to that we can aspire to hear that call. But the journey, the descent into the depths of the psyche, into the inferno, and back again through purgatorio that we've confronted and integrated and welcomed back the aspects of ourselves that were most difficult and towards becoming whole. In my mind, that's really what it's all about. And here's this. Whoops! This is the famous. I think this has appeared lots of places. 2 MRIs before psilocybin on the left and after, all these connections being made. So it's sort of, there's an electronic medical image of wholeness. And here's Jung's mandala that was on the cover of Man and His Symbols, the image of wholeness and completeness. John, if you could unmute all of us, hopefully we have a time to talk.
Well, I would ask people to unmute themselves if they have a question. Otherwise, we run the risk of getting some background noise. So we'll take a few questions. But before we do, from the audience, I had one question that showed up in the chat that I'm hoping you can address.
Oh.
And that was from a person who is in a public space and doesn't want the background noise to cause disturbance. I'm curious why these studies are never carried out in a natural setting or environment.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, and natural settings and environments, I think, would be ideal. And in fact, much of my own psychedelic experiences had that kind of setting. But these are laboratory studies where they try to control as many variables as they can, so that they can reach very specific conclusions. And that's really the only reason. It certainly is not considered better. And many people, as well as the guides and the researchers, we all often say, boy, I wish this could happen out in the woods or in the meadow or near the ocean. And thank you for that question. It's a good one.
If someone else has a question, you want to raise your hand, and that way we can kind of take everything in order without getting...
Yeah. Yes,
Yes,
I guess I have a question here. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, we're ready for you.
Okay. I have a question here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Yes.
We can hear you.
Very well.
Oh, okay. So I'm really thank you for very, very fascinating presentation, and I like it very much. I'm working on the Sufism or mysticism or mystic, rituals, and also I see lots of common ground between your work and the work of the people, especially unconsciousness. So my question is, do you have any kind of information related to psychic energy as a result of this kind of session? Psychic energy. So this is my main point. I'm working on this too. I hope I'm clear.
That's something that we certainly don't measure in these studies where we're trying to measure everything. People like Stanley Krittner could speak to this much better than I could. But people who come through these transformative experiences often feel such a connection to life, to nature, to other people, that they feel that there is a psychic connection, that they feel a part of everything that they experience. So I don't think that's, again, we're not, that's hard to describe that, but I think that the answer would be yes. Anytime that we can deal with at this this transpersonal level, we're in the realm of the psychic or the psi experience.
Mm. I think that transpersonal level also can be found in the, I don't want to say shamanic ritual, but also in the Sufism, in the, especially in the Muslim countries.
Yes.
I guess whatever you presented, exactly what I have discovered or witnessed with people I participated with them. They talk about the paradise, they talk about angel. Sometimes you get some kind of mystic unconsciousness. And the other people participating, they think that this guy can really reach the unknowable. So I think that the idea of the psychic energy related to cosmic or universe energy are really, or both of them are united or intermingle in the ritual or practice. So I see the guy who laying down on the sofa or on the bed, and you will helping him, and you talk about the universe, you talk about the images, and I get that we share that in my work. We share, some people talk about these images and symbols. As a matter of fact, or Carl Jung also, about the collective unconsciousness,
Right.
is very important in that area. Might be different experiences, but there is some common ground there between your work and the anthropological work of the unconsciousness or the ritual. And
No,
thank you very much.
No, I have no doubt. Thank you so much for your comment.
Michelle, you have a comment?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for this rich and amazing presentation. And I very much appreciate, so, you know, many of us are anthropologists here, and I think there is, I'm a medical anthropologist, and there's often, you know, a lot of trepidation and suspicion of the biomedical, medicalized model. But I appreciated two things about it, Dr. Morrison. I appreciated that there was somebody around in case somebody has a psychotic break. I really appreciated that sort of safety net. And B, I also appreciated your comment that this is powerful. This is a powerful experience. And, you know, perhaps, you know, one might want to think twice about just doing it recreationally on the weekends. So I was wondering if maybe you had any perspectives about the recreational use of psychedelics.
Yeah, I had at least one experience recreationally, and so that's all there was back in those days. That was very uncomfortable and very challenging, and took me a long time. I felt like I was back in my body. And after that, I thought, well, I'm not going to just do this. You know, it's not about, you know, we used to call dropping some acid and going to a concert. This is serious stuff. This is, and very much so. This is, if we use the Greek mythology metaphors, this is going into the area of taboo, the area of it's approaching the area of the gods. And as in Greek mythology, if someone, if a mortal tried to go into, try to get to Olympus and be with the gods, they would go through this taboo area. And if they were not initiated properly, they were eviscerated. They would just disappear. Or like Prometheus tied to a rock and have their liver eaten. It's serious stuff. It's serious stuff that opens up glorious, and it can open up glorious and wonderful experiences of consciousness, of being alive. So we want to be careful, but not also, we don't want to be overly careful, overly cautious. So I don't know where the field is heading. There's going to be there's this Wild West aspect to it, and there's going to be some casualties for sure. We just hope that what happens is not what happened in in the early 70s, where the whole research and where the whole process is shut down. It has to go underground again. So we want it to be expansive and fun and joyous and transformative in the most positive ways, and we want to respect it. We're going into the realm of the gods, and we must respect that area.
Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you.
Sure.
That was an excellent question. Do we have any other questions or comments? Did everything get squared away so well by Reed that you guys are all like,
That's
process now?
But I think my email address is available somewhere, John. If you want to,
I will put it in the chat again.
yeah, and please feel free to reach out if you'd like.
I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Bernie.
This is Bernie. Okay. So, question for Reed.
Yes.
Some people, it's somewhat rare, have natural ecstatic experiences, often from emotional or physical pain and suffering.
Right.
So the vision quest of a Native American is one example. Do you see any connection with such natural ecstatic experiences and psychedelic experiences? Is there any common chemical connections, physical chemical connections?
I don't know if they've studied chemically, and maybe some of you may know this better than I. What happens in a natural ecstatic experience, but I think that one of the ways to describe psychedelic experiences is going deeply into nature, in the nature of our psyches, the nature of our bodies, the nature of whatever consciousness is. The questions then come up of, do our brains make consciousness like medicine claims, or do our brains partake in consciousness? So I think we're going into the same area. Again, I've had experience with clients who have had spontaneous, autonomous sort of initiation, traumatic experiences where we've, in seeking to make it purposeful and healing, we sort of packaged it and looked at it and framed it as initiation, as a healing initiation. But I think we're in the same area. And again, I can't speak to that or about that with any great authority. That's just my belief.
Our next question is from Lisa.
Hi. Hey, everyone. Hey, everyone. Yeah, Reed, I really appreciated your talk. Right now, I'm doing a study of psychedelic integration groups, which is, the intention is very similarly therapeutic, but things are happening more in either naturalistic. Well, it's not in a clinical trial setting. It's either people doing it on their own or with a therapist. And I'm just wondering if you could talk more about the integration process of the clinical trials that you've been in. What is that? What shape has integration taken?
Yeah, it's a very, very important process, and in my mind, it takes place over those few hours and weeks after the session, the rest of their lives. I mean, I had a very powerful mescaline experience in my early 20s that I'm still integrating in a very positive way. It really showed me a lot about myself and about life. The integration in studies is very circumscribed. It's 6 to 9 hours usually, and depending upon the orientation of the guides, it can be. In my own bias here is that we don't want to make it overly psychotherapeutic. We don't want to say, "Well, take this, and what does this mean about your relationship with your mother?" That's for them to. We hope that people will go back and be in therapy. We advise them to do that, but we really want them to follow this inclination and this direction of the psyche, of the soul, and to identify ways to follow that, whether it's feelings or it's synchronicities, dreams. We want them to take that seriously. We don't want to define for them what it is. That's very important to me. But to let them know this is they've had a very sacred, important experience in their lives, and now they're going out into the world, and we hope that they can find ways to make that meaningful for them. And we recommend a therapist who has an orientation and experience in this area. The people who benefit most in integration have some kind of practice, a meditation practice, some kind of spiritual practice that can be the container to hold this experience, and they can grow. They can make it grow. Does that make sense to you, Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at the role of community in that and relationship. So looking at integration as a relational process as well as just a sort of an internal or a client therapist thing.
Yes, community is very, very important. And I think that's what often frustrated me with sort of going through integration with people and sort of saying, okay, bye. So again, having a practice that has a community context, I think is really important. And by the way, Lisa, nice to meet you. We've emailed a few times, so.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to see you. I was really looking forward to your talk, so thank you so much.
Sure.
Our next question is from Paul.
Hi there. So I have sort of a two-part question of a pre and a post, and I probably missed the answer to the first part of my question because I was a little late at the start. Who do you feel benefits the most from this sort of journey? Someone with bipolar, someone with borderline, someone with depression. Who really benefits from this? And the second, as a post question, there are some areas of society that would look at a person differently because they have had this experience. How do we help them with, in the same way that society looks at someone differently because they've lost their virginity or turned 18 or something else? How do we help them with that change?
Oh boy, good question. Now in the studies, there's a lot of screening that takes place. So I worked in a depression study, and people with bipolar disorder were screened out. People with borderline personality disorder were screened out. People with any history of psychosis were screened out. But that happens in any drug study. In studies where antidepressants were approved, they only work with pure depressants. Pure depression, which we know naturalistically doesn't happen in real life. We all have a little depression in us. We should. If we don't, there's something wrong with us in this crazy world. In studies, they're screened out. Usually, there's cautions about bipolar disorder because sometimes a psychedelic can set off a manic episode. But at Hopkins, we're doing several studies are going on right now with eating disorders, one with Lyme disease, OCD. What else is going on? I mean, just about anything. A lot of nicotine studies. So it's really wide open, but safety is the thing. The idea is not to look so much as the diagnostic category, but what will this person, do they have enough resources to be safe, internal and external resources to be safe through this process. And I think that in terms of society accepting them, it's the idea of these initiations is that the ego gets sort of right-sized. In Jungian terms, there's individuation goes in the direction of a change in the ego's self-axis. Self, he called the soul or psyche, in that early in our lives, for most of us, the ego is in charge. But later in life, and through processes like this, through going through life, through going through our own infernos and purgatories, the ego comes to serve the soul, the psyche, the deeper levels. So these are the people we want to respect. These are the people we look up to. There's a lot of education that has to go on with this in terms of public education. But some people go through this process and think that they're a shaman or they're a guru or that they know everything, and they start guiding other people. And so it's a little scary in that sense, but that'll probably shake itself out, I hope. But very good questions, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Merv?
Hello. Yes,
Hi.
Merve.
Hi, Merve.
Thank you very, very much for this amazing, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. My question relates to the center. So you said the center where this research undertook is called the Center for Consciousness and
Center for Psychedelics and Consciousness Research. If
yeah.
you go on the internet and you just search Psychedelics Hopkins, it comes up.
Yeah. So my question is, so this type of research, I think, looking at the name of the center, is not only done for the purpose of like therapeutic purposes, perhaps, but also perhaps to understand what consciousness is. Am I correct? And
yes.
If so, I would love to learn how, like, doing all this research, what is the center's or your view of consciousness? Because you refer to Jung a lot. Is it the collective unconscious, or is it something, or is it something that is all part of us, but then this psychedelics, what else are?
In terms of the center, I was sort of an outlier, being a depth psychologist. Most people were neuroscientists, and most people don't really, even though consciousness was in the title, that was really because the director, Roland Griffiths, is, and as you may know about him, he's very, very ill and maybe coming to the end of his life. He's a very spiritual man and a long-time meditator. And so consciousness was very important for him and for Bill Richards. And if you haven't read Bill Richards' book, Sacred Knowledge, please do that. That's on the reading list. So the real sort of guiding lights, so to speak, of the center were very spiritually oriented people. The rest of the people were researchers, and so there's not a real a definition from the center about what is consciousness, where does it come from, where is it going, how does it use us, and how do we use it? But I think that's coming. But I'm glad that is part of the title, because it's very important to me and a number of other people.
That's a very good. You wiggled your way out of that one really well, Reed. Because isn't that the question of the day? Well, we're coming up on our closing time, so we could extend for one or two more questions. Otherwise, I would like to thank you all for coming. Do we have any more questions? All right, I think we're good to go. So thank you so much for attending. This topic will be continued in a different way next month in November. Yes, very much, Reed. November, our first Friday event of November is with Michael Winkelman, who's going to be talking about the evolved psychology of the set and setting model. So this is very important. One person asked about, naturalistic settings as opposed to clinical settings. So the context in which a lot of this takes place is an incredibly important thing. And Michael will be talking about his views on how this evolved, that we would be influenced in that particular way. So thank you so much for coming. I'm going to conclude our recording now.